Chris Lee and Blake Lovell here as we continue to preview the Big 12 SEC Challenge. Tennessee, coached by Rick Barnes, going to Rick Barnes' former employee, the other UT, that's Texas. That game in Austin on Saturday night. Tennessee coming off a come-behind win from a hobbled Florida team. Texas had a pretty consistent year for the most part. Blake, what are your general thoughts on this one?
Yeah, we knew we'd get this game eventually in the SEC Big 12 Challenge. I think we figured it was going to happen at some point, and it's going to be interesting. Rick Barnes going back to Austin. I'm sure there will be a lot of emotion surrounding that, and obviously the success he had there. And yeah, this is a good game, and I think this is if you're looking for we're not going to call it a rock fight because I think these two teams should be able to put up some points. But let's be honest, like this is going to be your defense special here. I think these are two teams that have proven it on the defensive side that they are really good in that area. And we talked about Tennessee a lot this year, just about this team and what they're able to do on that side of the floor. And they've been very impressive. Really, outside of that game against Kentucky, right, where they just give up 107, that's worst case scenario. That's a Kentucky team that's just hitting everything. They're doing everything right, and that's just an outlier. I mean, so Tennessee's had a lot of good games where you've watched them and said, man, that team can defend. And we had questions about that going into the season, right? Because they lose Ede Pons, who was the reigning SEC Defensive Player of the Year, 2 years running, I think. And so it's like, how do you replace that? Well, Rick Barnes has still got it going on that side of the floor. But obviously that's where I think you start to look at this Tennessee team offensively, and can they take care of the ball here, right? Because these are two teams that do a really good job of forcing the other team to make mistakes. And obviously, we know that from Chris Beard. I mean, go back to what they did at Texas Tech, and that's the type of style he wants to play. He wants to, basically force teams to beat themselves. And, I think obviously he's done a pretty good job of doing that so far. So to me, that's where this comes down to. You've got to have, Tennessee, if you're Vescovi, he's got to make shots as he has. We've talked about him recently. He's become their best offensive player. Texas is going to do everything they can to try to slow him down. And that's where I think, you need a big game from Kennedy Chandler here. You need a big game from some of these other guys, I think, to be able to go on the road and win a game like this. But it's a pretty fascinating matchup on paper.
Tennessee, I feel like we're saying this a lot, and this is true of most teams, not great on the road, just no offensive consistency. Did get it together down the stretch. Vescovi's been the guy who's carried them. Kenny Chandler's their best player. I'm having a hard time betting against Texas at home here, given the way Tennessee's offense has been so inconsistent. But what do you see here as potential paths for Tennessee? Maybe something that we haven't already discussed.
Well, look, it's a styles clash, isn't it? I mean, you look at how Tennessee plays, you look at how Texas plays. They're both really good defensive teams, but it's like if you look at how the game is played, it happens in different ways, right? If you look at sort of the tempo and the possession link, we always like looking at those kind of things. Texas, much, much slower. Like, it's a grind. And I think that's for Tennessee may actually be a good thing, because I think sometimes if Tennessee can slow down a little bit, that may actually help them somewhat on offense. So I think this is a game where, just because it is going to be played out in sort of a defensive type manner. I mean, again, we would be shocked, wouldn't we, if this game is 80-75?
Yeah.
I'd just be stunned if that was the case. I think this is a game that's played in the mid 60s at best, low 70s. Like, I think even that's asking a lot probably from these two teams. But it's also a matter of who can get the tempo the way they want it, because Tennessee has, it seemed like there was a point where Tennessee played a little bit more of a methodical style, but it hasn't necessarily been that case with this team. And so I think that's it. It's a Texas team that's really good defensively, and they're good in areas on offense, but it's also a team that's, because they play the way they play, if you look up and down it, right? Like we've watched Texas this year, and it's like, well, they're not putting up 80. They're not putting up a lot of points like that. So I think that can play into Tennessee's favor here, is knowing that this is going to be kind of a game that's a grind. You've got to use your defense to be able to sort of, be able to stay right there in a game like that, knowing that Texas has done such a good job of being able to play the game the way they want to play it and force those turnovers and really limit good looks for the opposition. Tennessee shot selection, there's another one I was thinking of. Like, shot selection, I think is going to be important always against a Chris Beard team. Like he will push you the direction he wants to push you. And I think that's where Tennessee, you've got a freshman point guard, right? Kennedy Chandler, who's going to, have the ball in his hands a lot. And that's where, Vescovy and those kind of guys, you got to take good shots against this Texas team to beat them. And so I think that's another important part for Tennessee.
Yeah. Possessions against Texas's defense take almost 19 seconds, which is pretty absurd. Yeah. That's where it's going to be on them to not turn the ball over. You just watch that offense at times, and it just gets bogged down. I think they're not a great three-point shooting team. They don't really have that wing marksman that some past Tennessee teams have had, and I think that's where Chandler is going to have to be patient and just not make young mistakes, because Texas can frustrate you, and Tennessee's offense has been frustrating to watch at times.
Well, look, statistically, Tennessee forces more turnovers than Texas does, and I think that's something, too, to think about here is that's another way.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to be – I think Tennessee's 11th. I've got my notes here. They're 11th nationally in turnovers forced. Texas is 33rd. So, not a huge difference there. It's like one turnover. But because you're probably going to get worse shots than you usually get because you're playing a team like Texas, you need to be able to force those turnovers and take those easy opportunities to where it doesn't just become – a 25-second possession every time, right? So I think that's where Tennessee's they've got to force those turnovers like they have been doing, because that will allow them some easy offense and be able to get, right? Even a game like this, if you can get 10 points off turnovers where you get a steal and you go shoot a layup, that can be huge in a game that, quite frankly, as we said, may not get to the 70s. So I think that's a very important aspect to look at in terms of the matchup too.
Yeah, and we have seen Tennessee get easy buckets on the other end through its defense when the offense bogs down. That's what has bailed them out many times. Okay, Ken Pomeroy's got this as a 3-point game in Texas's favor. No lines out as we do this Thursday morning, but given that, where do you lean?
I know I'm not being very exciting here, but I'm going to take the favorite again, I think. Look, it's like I said, it's Texas, and man, just seeing them play, and I know that they've had some problems too at times with consistency. But I just think that, once again, if you flip it, one of these underdogs, right, is going to win. And we talk about, like, some of these teams, like we've done previews on the other games. Some of these teams are not huge underdogs. Like these are 3 to 5 point type games in a lot of these instances. And so it's a couple plays here or there. That's the difference. And if you flipped it, if this game's in Knoxville, maybe we have a different opinion, but I just think that this is I'm still not there yet on Tennessee. And this, like we've talked about them this year. And I think that's the issue is I know the numbers look good for them at times, but I'm still not 100% there yet with them. And it's because I'd like to see them still find their way on offense. And I don't know if they've done that yet. And I think going up against one of the better defensive teams in the country too, that could kind of show itself in this one. But if Tennessee wins this game, I'm jumping aboard. But right now, I think I like Texas.
I'm right there with you. I want to jump on Tennessee. I just haven't been able to for the same reasons you have. And for people who are just discovering us, we watch a lot of SEC basketball. Like when it is Tuesday and Wednesday nights and when it's Saturday, I've got 2 TVs on watching SEC games. I don't know if you have 1 or 2 on, but you're doing the same thing. We don't just look at the numbers. We watch these teams a lot. I go to some games in Nashville. Now, I've not seen Texas this year, and I know that you have because you are a bona fide basketball junkie. But just as context for people, we have seen a lot of Tennessee play this year.
Let me point this out, too, real quick. Tennessee, they're 5 losses this year, right? They're all away from home.
Yeah.
And you talk about the variety of outcomes. It's like the one they had against Villanova earlier in the year that was just brutal to watch. They lost by 18, but it's like, that neutral court game against Texas Tech, they lose in overtime. Alabama, they had their chances, they're shorthanded, right? They still almost win that game. LSU didn't play great, but that's where the offense comes in. And the Kentucky game, as we said, just a complete on the other side of the spectrum. So, but there's something all 5 of those teams have in common. They're all pretty good teams. And so I think that's where it's like Tennessee's lost 5 games, but they've lost 5 games to good competition. And unfortunately, Alabama's probably on the bottom of that just because of their inconsistency. But I think that too, like it's hard to know because they've actually played pretty well for teams. And they've won some road games too, as we've said. I mean, they've beaten Colorado on the road, beat Vanderbilt, but didn't play great in that one. So I think that's another, maybe if you're looking at it for Texas, like, well, Tennessee can prove they can beat one of these kind of teams away from home. It's hard to pick them in that scenario.
Yeah. We've got a special partnership with Action 24/7. Tell folks about it.
Yep, link in the description below. Click on that link. Use the code SOUTH14. They're your first deposit. They'll match up to $800. So be sure to use that for all these Big 12 SEC challenge games. Sign up with them and, make your bets.
He's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. Thanks for watching, and please hit the subscribe button while you're at it. That helps us out. We'll see you again soon with more on the Big 12 SEC Challenge.